Satellite Cree First Nation in Treaty 6 territory. Joanne is an elder with the CRISM Prairie Node and will be opening today's event. Welcome, Joanne.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
We can, yes.
Okay, thank you. So I was asked to open up this event with a good prayer. So I want to do that now. CRISM has already given me tobacco, for this event. So Joanne Saddleback, Ogisagoasquel Netsigasun. I'm from the Blue Eagle Thunderbird clan of the Western Mountains, and I am the principal elder for CRISM. So they've asked me to do this, and I'm only too happy to do so. So, o mamang tawinan kasi man tu wichenan. O mamang tawinan kasi man tu square wichenan. Hey kasi man tu rusa san wichenan. Isa go akbe ako huwam sa wichenan. Hey. Hey masumke wichenan. Sa wichenan. Hey masum. Musum mahimranses. Jenn Sawayan Musum Masqua Vijayan Sawayan Musumustus Vijayan Sawayan I Heo Peso Vijayan Sawayan Mosonta Govinda Vijayan Nehan Vijayan Nehio Vijayan Nehio Nico I Nehio Square Nehio Napeo Nehio Equal. Thank you very much. Thank you, those who prayed with me. We need all the help, good thinking, that we can. Our old people tell us that it doesn't matter what the topic is. If you're talking about First Nations people, you're talking about culture. And for you to understand how culture moves is that culture is not a product. So you go to a round dance or something. I say round dance because it's a dance for health. It's not about the product, the being there. It's how we got there. So culture is the process, how you get there. So it's not the product. It's also about, in order to access culture, you need protocol. So here I have this tobacco here. That's part of the protocol, and all protocol begins with tobacco. It's said in our history that it's the Creator himself who gave us tobacco. So it's his medicine. That's why all protocol begins with tobacco. And what protocol does, and it's those offerings that you would give. So you're not paying the elder or paying kateya yak. What you're doing is that it's about you opening up your mind, opening your heart so vastly that when kateya ya, an elder, speaks, you can not only conceptualize what that elder is saying, you can believe what that elder is saying. And when it comes to our people who are suffering from addictions, when people, there are a number of things in which we start having to work together, and that's the work that CRISM is doing with elders and with the Indigenous community. What do we have that we can work together and combine? What kinds of things are there to let people know, there isn't just one solution. There's a way to reach Tipawan again. That's balanced Tipawan, mind, body, emotion, spirit, to find that again in your connection to your community, your connection to your land. And these are kinds of the works that we're doing, and especially in ceremony. Ceremony is not just a specific event that you go to and participate in. It's actually telling a story. It's telling part of a story. And part of that story is a huge tool of solution and learning. about how we work together and about how we can help our own people and allow both the science, your science, and our science to come together. So I'm hoping that we can look into those things when we're talking about the Indigenous community and begin to have that relationship and that understanding. So there's that Wahotowin, that kinship, and there is that friendship that we can trust one another, open the doors, and work together. That's what I have to say to you this afternoon. With that, I hope you have a very good meeting. Good minds, good hearts come together, that we do good work for the community. And I say, ai hai hai. Ordinarily, you say ai hai, not hi hai, but ai hai. That means thank you. And when an old person like me says ai hai hai, I'm not just thanking you, I'm actually thanking the Creator that He made you. So to all the good people, all the good minds and hearts that are on this online meeting today, ai hai hai to each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanne. So today's event is supported by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research and the CRISM Prairie Node. The event will feature two parts. First, we'll welcome a panel of community experts on substance use and the toxic drug crisis in rural Canada. After the panel, there will be a time for audience Q&A, and we invite you to submit questions during the panel using the Q&A feature on the Zoom, found at the bottom of your screen. Sorry, I just wanted to switch that. So after the panel, or please do not submit questions in the chat box. The panel will be recorded and will be uploaded to the CRISM Prairie Node web page. Second, we'll be hosting small group discussions in breakout rooms. This is an opportunity to connect with others across Canada and discuss what is going on in your community and how we can move forward. Moderators will be taking notes during the discussion, and we will be summarizing the main ideas in a short community report. This final summary report will be emailed to all registrants in March. We recognize that today's event may cause feelings of distress or overwhelm. You are welcome to leave and rejoin the event at any time. We have also created a list of resources that are available to participants. This list is available on page 8 of the welcome package that you were emailed. We will also be providing an optional debrief space on Zoom following the event for anyone who would like to talk further. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Each panelist will present, and then we will open the floor for audience questions. Panelists, I will raise my hand to signal when there is 1 minute left, my Zoom hand, and then interrupt if we are running over time to make sure we have time for audience questions at the end. So first, I'd like to welcome Holly Mathias. Holly Mathias is a Vanier Scholar, 2023 Pierre Elliott Trudeau Scholar, and doctoral student at the University of Alberta's School of Public Health. Holly's community-driven research examines the intersections of drug policy, gender, and family caregiving in the rural Canadian context. Holly is a national board member of the Canadian Students for Sensible Drug Policy, CSSDP. Welcome, Holly. Second is Jenn McCrindle. For the last 5 years, she has worked rural harm reduction outreach with Turning Point on Treaty 6 and 7 lands in central Alberta. She is now the communications coordinator for the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs. Previously, she was the stimulus program coordinator at the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition and a board member of AWARE, Alberta Alliance Who Educate and Advocate Responsibly. Welcome, Jenn. Our third panelist is Tracy Lockhart. Tracy is a nurse with over 30 years of diverse experience. She has held several pivotal roles during her nursing career at the Brandon Regional Hospital. A proud and strong Indigenous woman, she passionately advocates for all individuals, especially in rural and remote regions where access to services may not be readily available. Tracy currently works for Indigenous Services Canada in remote northern Manitoba, encouraging holistic wellness and community health. She is the mother of 3 adult children, encouraging them to find the path to true happiness and health. Welcome, Tracy. And finally, we will also hear from Chantel Huel. Chantel is a formerly incarcerated mother, grandmother, daughter, sister, partner, and friend. Chantel is currently on a journey to find greater balance and joy in her life and work by taking each day as it comes and by using her voice and experiences to live honestly and with integrity. So welcome to all of our amazing panelists. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you, and I will turn it over now to Holly.
Great, thank you, Elaine. So hi, everyone. I'm really looking forward today to sharing an overview of the evidence that we have on rural and remote, the toxic drug crisis in rural and remote Canada. And so rural communities are very near and dear to my heart, having grown up in rural Nova Scotia and having had the opportunity to work with a number of rural communities across the Atlantic provinces and now in the Prairie provinces. I will say that I'll be presenting the Coles Note version of the evidence. So I encourage you to please reach out to me via email, which is listed here, if you want to have a more fulsome discussion about anything that I talk about today. So first, I'd like to start off with some terminology. We know that people use all kinds of substances in communities of all sizes. Today, however, we're focusing on the toxic drug supply. And since 2016, we know that well over 40,000 Canadians have died from apparent opioid and stimulant-related deaths. And thousands more have been hospitalized and experience other adverse health and social events, such as acquired brain injury, arrest, criminalization, and risks of HIV and hepatitis C. And the majority of these deaths can be attributed to an increasingly toxic drug supply, including things like fentanyl and benzodiazepines that are now being found in the street supply of drugs. Today, we're also going to be talking a lot about rural. You're going to hear that word a lot, and I think it's important for us to have a shared understanding of what we mean by rural. And so this is kind of a million-dollar question for me because there is no universal definition of rural. And depending on the field that you're in or the work that you're looking at, people are going to define rural quite differently. Some people will use definitions that consider culture or values or the economy. Some people will look at demography and geography. But to keep things simple for us today, I'm going to be referring to rural communities as communities of under 10,000 people. And I know that definition will differ depending on your context. I also just want to refer to this map as well from Statistics Canada. And this map portrays what is urban and what is rural in Canada. Everything in the gray is rural. And so you can see that it makes up quite a significant portion of Canada's land mass. Not only that, we have about 16% of the Canadian population living rurally, and that's about just over 6 million people. We also know that some provinces, and particularly the territories as well, have more people living in rural places. So when you think about the Atlantic provinces, for example, you have upwards to about 50% of the population living in rural places. So how many people are impacted by the toxic drug supply in rural Canada? And that's probably the second million-dollar question of today's talk, because we really don't know. There's very limited publicly available public health surveillance data. We do know that some of the provinces like British Columbia and Ontario do provide a breakdown of drug-related deaths through their local integrated health network or local health authority. But again, this is helpful, but there are several complications with it or challenges with it. The first being that the definition of rural and how we think about rural can vary depending on province. And we also know that the provinces don't necessarily have a uniform way of reporting. And so it's really hard to get a sense of the national picture when some provinces report by community or place and others don't. This is also, I should point out, death-related data as well. And so it's very hard to have a full picture of who might be using substances in a rural context, as well as what the unmet need might be for this population. There is a little bit of data around prescription opioid monitoring in rural Canada. And this data is from around 2018, where it was estimated that around 70,000 people were misusing prescription opioids. But again, we know that the context of substance use is evolving and that more people are using non-prescription opioids and stimulants. So this is only, again, just a small snapshot of a larger population. And some of this limited data can be attributed to wanting privacy and more confidentiality for communities, which I think is very valid. But again, there are complications when we want to have evidence-informed policies and programs. It can make it very difficult to be able to implement policies and programs that respond to a community context. But we do know that many rural communities are impacted by toxic drug supply, and we know this from research. We know this from talking to community members, people who use drugs and their families, and as well as hearing media stories. And we're going to be hearing more stories today during this panel. So what do we know? We do know that there are key populations who are living in rural and remote areas across Canada, and many of these key populations are disproportionately impacted by the toxic drug crisis. Most notably, I do want to recognize that Indigenous people in Canada are disproportionately impacted, many of whom live rurally and remotely. We know that in Alberta, most recently, there was data released that the life expectancy of First Nations men and women had decreased by 7 years, and this was due in part to drug-related deaths. And just this week, data was released from the First Nations Health Authority in British Columbia, and it suggested that while First Nations people account for about 3.4% of the provincial population in BC, they're accounting for nearly 18% of the drug-related deaths that happened in the past calendar year. This means that that Indigenous people are 6 times more likely to die from drug-related causes compared to the non-Indigenous population in BC. There's also a gendered element to this that I think is very important to recognize, and that's that First Nations women in BC are also 12 times more likely to die from a toxic drug supply than non-Indigenous women in BC. There are other populations that are disproportionately impacted as well, including men in the trades. And we also are learning more about populations that might be at higher risk, such as youth, people working in agriculture, and people working in extractive fossil fuel industries. We also know that people who use drugs in rural places are at increased risk of harms. And so a spatial analysis in British Columbia suggests that people who use drugs in rural BC have a 30% higher risk of experiencing a fatal drug poisoning event than their counterparts who are living in more urban areas of BC. And in some communities, this risk increased to about 50% in other areas. We also know from some qualitative work that's been done in British Columbia that many people who use drugs prefer to use alone or in private residences, simply for the fact that there is a lot of shame and stigma that comes with using drugs, and stigma that's perpetuated in very rural and small communities. And finally, most of the research evidence that we have on the toxic drug crisis in rural and remote Canada is centered on the experiences of accessing harm reduction and treatment services. And there have been studies that have been conducted on this virtually coast to coast. There is research from rural British Columbia, Manitoba, Ontario, and the Atlantic provinces. And the challenges have pretty much been the same across the board. We know that there are very few services that operate in rural places, so if at all. And when people who use drugs are able to go to access services, we know that they rarely have options of what they can access. We also know that there are some challenges related to limited operating hours. So for example, in a CIHR-funded study in Atlantic Canada that I was a part of a few years ago, we heard from many people who use drugs that in rural places, pharmacies might only be operating Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, which makes it really hard to access opioid agonist therapy, for example, if you're going to a pharmacy. And not to mention if you're doing that in extreme weather conditions, which seem to impact those smaller communities. Transportation is also a huge challenge, even on good weather days, especially in communities where there's limited public transportation. I also want to point out that lack of privacy in communities where everyone knows everyone can also be a real challenge to accessing services, especially when there's very vocal public opposition to harm reduction and supporting people who use drugs in general. That being said, there's a lot of attributes of rural communities that are very supportive and do support people who use drugs who want to access treatment and services. And these are things like strong social networks. I also think it's really important that we debunk the sort of myth that rural communities are very stagnant, very adverse to change, because that's simply not true. We have many really great stories of innovative and creative work that's happening in rural places through things like virtual services, outreach and mobile services. And you're going to hear more about one example very shortly. So in closing in my little piece, I was recently asked about some items on my wish list, I guess, or things that I would like to prioritize. And I thought that was a really nice way of framing some of the things that I think could be done. And my wish list is very long. There are so many items on it, but I picked 3 today that I thought might be most salient and relevant to this population and to this audience today. So my first is that I think we desperately need transparent, timely, and robust public health surveillance data, both in terms of looking at place and community so that we can have a greater response, but also in terms of thinking about gender, age range, indigeneity, and race-based data as well. And these aspects help us to better inform equitable and impactful policy and program decisions. We also desperately need greater understanding and compassion in our communities. This is very much a human issue with friends and families and neighbors who are impacted and dying. And learning and listening, which we're doing today, is one step, but also we have to treat people who use drugs with dignity and respect. And that will go a long way in transforming relationships, as well as experiences of people in smaller communities. And then thirdly and finally, community-driven research policies and programs are needed, especially those that address specific community needs and are designed with people who use drugs, families, and communities at the forefront. Even though there are some really great evidence-based interventions happening in cities and urban areas and bigger places, it's not enough just to copy and paste those into rural communities without knowing the evidence and the local context of what's going to work. And on that note, I want to add that our research group here at the University of Alberta is about to embark on some very exciting community-based research that aims to understand the experiences of family members who are providing unpaid support or caregiving to people who use drugs in rural communities across the Prairie provinces. And so we're very excited to get that project underway and to contribute more knowledge about this issue in the context of rural Canada. And we look forward to sharing more information about that and our findings in future, hopefully, webinars. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Holly. So next we'll hear from Jenn.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself there for a second. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenn McCrindle, and I am the Rural Harm Reduction Outreach worker for Central Alberta. So here's some pictures I just thought were cute and kind of show what I do. So rural outreach is obviously mobile. I'll go over the area that we cover in an additional slide a couple away. In the bottom right-hand corner, you see the deer there. Like, that's how rural I am. I am in the middle of nowhere and traveling all the time to meet with people who use drugs. I should say that Turning Point is a harm reduction agency that has been around, I want to say 34, 35 years, based out of Red Deer. There's several programs that Turning Point operates, such as like their harm reduction program, supply distribution, a women's program, Night Reach. So that's outreach workers going out 365 days a year after hours. Health promotion. So that's linking people who are HIV positive or Hep C positive to treatments. STBBI prevention, and then our overdose prevention and take-home naloxone program. Next slide, please. I know that land acknowledgements have been done, but I just thought it was important to do one for where Turning Point does their work. So we are situated in Waskesiu CP, which is Red Deer, colonially known as Red Deer, on Treaty 7, the traditional territory and meeting place of the Blackfoot, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda peoples, and that this region also rests on Treaty 6, ancestral Métis, Cree, and Saulteaux territory. We honor our relationships with the First Nations of this land and are grateful for the opportunities to collectively build healthier and safer communities. And I know Holly just mentioned this, but I did want to reiterate the point that this crisis is affecting First Nations communities at a far greater rate, and we need to do better to work towards reconciliation and do better by First Nations people. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, this is the one with the weird words. Okay, so Turning Point. This is where our rural outreach area spans. It's 94,000 kilometers between two of us. So as you can see, we do some on-reserve work around Rocky Mountain House, and then we go all the way east to the Saskatchewan border. I will say very rarely do we go quite that far, But if it was, you know, a presentation or something, we absolutely would travel to the Saskatchewan border. The clients that we have out east, like that far, we would typically mail them supplies. And so we go up to Wetaskiwin and Musqueam, which isn't really listed there. Even further north to Vegreville, Thorsby, Two Hills, and then as far south as Three Hills and Drumheller. Typically, I work in the East Central, so think of anywhere down the Highway 2 corridor and then east. So a lot of my work is in Drumheller. I'm very busy in Drumheller. Hannah is another place. Shout out to Nickelback. Yeah, and then my coworker tends to go a little bit more north and west. So we have a huge area to cover, and it's only one full-time position split into the two of us. So we have a lot of traveling to do. It's impossible to get, you know, everywhere that we need to be, but we do have our, you know, like hotspot communities such as Drumheller that we get to, say, every 2 weeks, because we have a fairly large client base, I guess, there. This program has been operating since 2012, so it's not really a new thing, and I did this in 2012, and then I went to Edmonton, and then I came back. And so for the last 5 years, I've been watching this program grow and seeing the need for more rural outreach, and it's been really gratifying to see our work, you know, become more acceptable, and I don't know if that's the right word, but people are more interested in our work and they're reaching out more, and that's, you know, that's all we can really ask for, is to get the word out for people that need our services. And finally on this slide, I'll just say that the funding to do this work has always been provided by United Way. So thanks to United Way. Next slide, please. Okay, so I tend to focus on people who use drugs. Relationships with service providers are definitely important. Community outreach is also definitely important, but as someone with lived experience, I am in a rural area. I am really drawn to, you know, the people who need us. And so that's where I tend to focus my efforts. So some things that we do to provide supports for people using drugs would be obviously supply distribution. So that's all the harm reduction supplies, new syringes, pipes, all the using supplies that people would need. We're mobile, obviously. So what I do is load up my car full of supplies. We kind of touch base with our people a couple of days ahead of time, ask them what they need, so we have a general idea of what to bring. Load up our cars and we travel to wherever we're going. Access to sharps containers and disposal. Now, this is a huge one, maybe surprisingly in rural areas. There's not a lot of places for people to privately or confidentially dispose of their drug-using supplies. A lot of people don't feel comfortable going to the hospital or to a pharmacy, especially if it's you know, a pharmacy where they might access their oat treatment. You know, they don't want people to know that, you know, maybe they're still using substances. So offering that service is it's always quite busy in a lot of different community like I'll say bars and hotels and gas stations and places you might not, you know, think of have reached out wanting some sharps containers. We're still trying to get them into more public areas, which has been kind of slow going. It's got to go through different town councils and whatnot to get approved, but we're working on that. One story that I have, and I think it was Strathmore a couple of years ago, the fire department was called to a residence where there was just thousands and thousands buckets of used syringes, and the person using them was trying to hide them, hiding them in closets and, you know, under clothes. And so I think it was a parent that lived in the house, didn't necessarily know that they were there, but they didn't feel like, you know, they had an option for where to take, you know, their used syringes. So you know, freeing up something like, I think it was the fire department who responded to that. If we can assist in taking people's used supplies, we'll definitely do that. I have no problem putting used gear in my car and taking it to the pharmacy or meeting with my manager and giving them the used stuff for proper disposal in the office. Naloxone kits and training, obviously that's probably the number one thing that we're doing all the time, training people in the event of a poisoning, proper use of naloxone. I'll go into that a bit more about different places that we've talked to. Always assisting with navigating community resources where that may be the food bank. How do I access that? Or income support, housing applications, which is a whole other thing in rural communities. There's obviously not a lot of housing options for people. So we're always, just assisting with what people need. Peer support. So this is my jam. And through the years, I've come in contact with different, different places along people's journeys. Some people that I've connected with are in recovery, and so to volunteer with me isn't maybe the best thing for them. So I try to include them in, like, if I'm going to a community to sit at a table at a community fair or something, I'll support those people in recovery to be a part of this as well, and for something that's safe for them. I'm always available. Maybe I shouldn't be, but it's just not reality. I'm always available to talk to people. And I think that's one of the strengths of rural outreach, is that the people I work with can always text or phone, or, the odd time I've jumped on a Zoom with people. Because as I think it was Holly said earlier, services aren't, they're available 9 to 5, but, most crises or things happen after hours. So to just be a support to people no matter what time it is. I mean, obviously I'm not taking calls at 2 a.m, but I will always sit and chat with people. I will always include them in the work. I used to run a drug user group rurally called Come As You Are. Excuse me. Which was really cool to bring people together, do some advocacy pieces, do some review of documents, community just like coming together and talking about things. Sadly, most of our members have passed away, and it's no longer running, but I always try to be a peer support to people because I've been there. Although I do, consider myself in recovery now, it's harm reduction that got me, as stable as I am today. So I think it's important to give back and share that with community. Of course, we are always doing referrals to OAT treatment and healthcare, whether it's wounds or infections. We're always trying to get people to get, the best healthcare possible. It's tricky in rural areas. There's not a lot of any walk-in clinics or, hubs like there is in urban centers for these types of things. But we're also, working on that, slow going, trying to get hubs into hospitals where it's more of a harm reduction focus. Always, of course, HIV and Hep C prevention and access to testing. We have nurses at Turning Point, so, we can hook them up with one of our in-office nurses to get some more treatment and testing done. Same with STBBI education and awareness. This tends to fall with nurses as well, but we're always, of course, educating on safer sex practices and distributing supplies. And advocacy, whether that's talking to VODP clinic, that's virtual opioid dependency program here in Alberta, for people to get medical coverage, or, they need a housing, some sort of referral letter. We're always trying to advocate for the people that we work with. Next
Thank
slide.
you, Jen. Oh, sorry, Jen. I'll just have to cut you off there. Unfortunately, we're just out of time, but we will certainly have a lot of time for discussion. And so hopefully, if you have any final points, you can make it during the Q&A.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so next up, I will turn it over to Tracy Lockhart.
Hello, everybody. Where to begin? Well, I'd like you to grab out your favorite beverage, cup of coffee, water, soda, whatever. No note taking is required. And let me begin. My name is Tracy, and I am a nurse and the mom of 3 adult children. How do I know what to say to a group discussing substance use disorders? I could tell you how it is destroying families, lives, cultures, future generations. I could give you information about crime, the statistics, the number of emergency cases, hospitalizations yearly, and of community health care resources required for medical treatment related to substance use. That would not even begin to touch on the number of mental health issues we are experiencing in communities, not just the individuals who have the disorder, but their families, which is now multi-generational. The whole family tree. A substance use disorder affects the individual, their parents, their siblings, their grandparents, their friends. The list goes on and on. I could speak of the trauma I have seen working in healthcare with individuals and families. But today I will talk to you about my son and the difficulties we have experienced in addressing substance use disorder and what I have learned. I'm speaking to you about our story with his permission. Our family started quickly. Nolan was born a little early, 6 weeks early. This was unexpected. The first words out of my mouth as they laid him on my chest were, "This baby needs suctioning right away." He was promptly whisked off to the NICU. A week of hospitalizations on BiPAP, followed by me advocating that I was not leaving my baby in the hospital, made for many tears, frustrations, and feelings of isolation as we lived over an hour and a half from the hospital. Nolan quickly had a brother and a sister join him. 3 children in 3 years, busy, busy times. 2 adorable, mischievous boys followed by their sister. Such a high energy household. Little did I know those days were the easy days. We were the parents who were going to do everything right. Cloth diapers, breastfeeding, doing what's best for our babies and healthy families. Our entertainment was our children. Our social lives were our children. Keep your kids in sports and activities to keep them out of trouble. We did it. And then our world started to change. What made it change? I've asked myself many, many times, and I've yet to come up with an answer. Each child is different in their personalities. Nolan was brilliant. Of course, every parent wants to believe their child is brilliant, but he honestly was. My friend, who's a teacher, was over for a play date with her kids one day. I went on a short errand. When I returned, she said, "Do you know Nolan could say his alphabet?" Of course I knew. He was 5. She said, "Do you know he can say it frontwards and backwards?" When I asked him to say his alphabet, he rambled it off just as quick both ways. When I asked him how he knew how to do that, he said it was on the walls at daycare and he just learned it left to right and right to left. He read at that same daycare to children, Dr. Seuss books, to the other children even older than him. He was 5. Why do I tell you this? Because it could happen to you. Did he fit in the normal box of our school system? No, he did not. We noted that if you don't fit in the box, you tend to get singled out, in fact, ostracized by some of our educators. He had difficulty with some fine motor skills, crafts, and would much rather read than be bothered with subjects he didn't care about. He could write excellent stories. In fact, after a family vacation, a teacher suggested he could write for a travel magazine. And you may be asking yourself, why am I telling you this about his childhood? To me, it's simple, because substance use disorder can affect anyone, absolutely anyone. It does not matter what you taught your children, right from wrong, good moral values and codes. Don't ever think, not in a million years, it cannot happen to you. Our $1 million years began when he was in grade 8 during the May long weekend. I came home from work and found him slumped over the computer desk downstairs. A Slurpee was beside him. "Nolan? Nolan," I repeated. Nothing. I shook his shoulder and all I could smell was booze. No response. I moved him to the floor and tried to get a response. Nothing. No groan at sternal rub. I dragged him to the bottom of the stairs, rolled him to sideline, and called 911. Subsequently, the ambulance came. He was treated at the hospital. A long and many discussions occurred. Him and a friend thought it would be fun to add alcohol to their Slurpees. A lock was put on the liquor cabinet. And before you think children learn what they see, as parents, we did not drink often or to get intoxicated. The occasional happy hour with neighbors and kids could play, and we could barbecue. The all-Canadian family. We even went to the emergency department, and Nolan thanked everyone. And we took subway trays in. After all, I worked in that facility. If that were the only time we had to be in the emergency department. The next year, we began to notice marijuana use. Our 14-year-old was stoned right at the start of grade 9. A new school. We had the talks that it was illegal, the whole shebang. And then the big guy showed up at our door for him. You know the ones, the tough guys. Nolan was not tough. He was slight. He played competitive soccer. It was then I knew. I told Nolan, you tell those guys not to be afraid of your dad, be afraid of your mom, and for them never to show up here again. They didn't. If only life were that easy. And so the life of drug use began to take over. I can't tell you the number of bongs I found and would be breaking, the bags of weed flushed, the subsequent fights over money owed, the yelling, cajoling to get him to go to school. I changed jobs so I could drive him to school and watch him walk in the front door, only to learn he walked out the back. There were suspensions for drug use. And where to turn for help? This was all before the legalization of marijuana. We had family counseling. I can't tell you the look of shock I've seen on counselors' faces and how many times I've heard the statement, I can't imagine. And then things became beyond what we could handle. He required involuntary assessment. This required him to have a court order. Now, if you ever had to do this, I'm sorry you've had the experience. If you haven't, consider yourself that you've drawn a lucky card. Presenting yourself to the magistrate, explaining the trauma you're experiencing, you are then given a clipboard and told to go fill out the form. There is no private room for you to go to. You can sit with everyone else who may be paying parking tickets or dealing with an infraction. You may be distressed and crying, as was I. I found a printing room and stood there with a Xerox machine, crying and filling out the forms. Of course, the police came and they escorted him 2 hours away, and your son blames you. The blame, the start of the blame. We did this twice. One time his father did the involuntary assessment for youth treatment. The next time I completed it. This was for youth assessment. Again, let me tell you, in Manitoba, once someone hits 18, good luck in getting information on what's going on with your loved ones. The system is not conclusive to liaising with those who are attempting to help to get treatment. The system will discharge their patient to you, but you will get no information from them. This is the law according to FIA. I understand but feel that the laws need to change in cases of substance use disorder, as many users are not mentally competent at that time. Nolan did at one time have a wonderful family physician. She had a good rapport with him, and as his parents, we were able to attend appointments with him. We were able to discuss concerns and able to have prescriptions of olanzapine. Nolan would often become delusional and paranoid when using substances. We would get up in the night and he would be up all night. The box springs would be cut open as he felt that midgets were under the bed spying on him. He would be demanding the blueprints of the house as he felt they were in the walls. Numerous hospitalizations have occurred during the years with life-altering consequences. And in being a nurse, there is a fine line between advocating and demanding treatment. Your coworkers don't know how to respond to you. Physicians and surgeons I knew well would come into my son's room to assess him and not acknowledge me. Of course, I was sure to say, hey, how are you? Haven't you missed me? Fellow nurses would be hesitant to talk to me. Overdoses can occur anywhere, even in other provinces. You may not get to know where your child is, and you get a call and they get a bill for ambulances and they have no way to pay for it, and life becomes a vicious cycle of how are you going to pay for that? And the usual line is, don't worry about it. Then the hospitalizations become more revolving door. Overdose treated and out the door, no follow-up, no places to stay, no discussion of treatment plan with the family. Detox programs, long, arduous processes when you live rural. Waitlists are long. Many physicians are unfamiliar with the processes. They're often not clear-cut and the forms are difficult. An example is medications must be in blister packs and from specific pharmacies. Not so easy when you live over 2 hours away. And if there is a situation, you may be kicked out at any time, even in the winter, -40 with no funds in the middle of the night, and you're in a different city. Transportation to detox, not always a police escort. I can remember when Nolan turned 22 on his birthday. He was to go to detox. I had to contact the police as he felt if he was gone, someone was going to harm his family. He was patrolling our yard with a knife. I convinced him to put down the knife. Then the police came and convinced him they would make sure our family was safe. I drove him to Winnipeg that day. And imagine my alarm when I'm driving on the Trans-Canada Highway and he's shooting up in my vehicle. I just kept driving to get my son help. The irony was I was advocating for him 22 days to the day that he was born. Opioid treatment, easier to get on the outside than on the inside. Why is opioid addiction not started immediately in hospital? Wait lists are long. I drove with my son to Winnipeg for over 2 weeks, 3 times a week as he waited on the Suboxone treatment in our community. This was after being on a wait list for months and being in the detox program in Winnipeg. Naloxone kits. Several years ago, Manitoba would give naloxone kits to substance users. I advocated with public health that I should be able to have a kit as Nolan wouldn't come in with me. The usual, I'm not using anymore, Mom. I was finally able to obtain a kit from public health as I was advocating. They knew Nolan was a frequent user of opiates. Everyone in our family knew where the kit was kept in the cupboard. At that time, it was injectable naloxone only. One instance, I couldn't get a hold of Nolan for a couple of days. I went to his townhouse at lunch directly from work. His door was locked. I called out, no answer. Something told me to go upstairs. I couldn't get his door open. He was passed out against the door. His room was in total disarray. I couldn't rouse him. I had to call his dad for the kit. He brought it as he could get there quicker than any emergency response. Respirations were shallow at approximately 6 to 10. I gave naloxone as his dad propped him up and held him. His words, "Stay with me, son." As I held him, "will stay with me forever." The 911 questions were long. I ended up giving 2 doses and he was slow to rouse. He was taken to the hospital for assessment. I do believe naloxone and a mother's sixth sense saved his life that day. Today, I do not live in the same community. I moved over 8 hours away as life circumstances change. Do I still support my son? Yes, he most likely will suffer from mental health issues in some form for the rest of his life. Not to mention the physical aspects from abuse he has suffered while using. He continues to struggle with substance abuse. He varies day to day, whether he needs help or not. Have my dreams for him changed? Yes. Do I have hope for the future? Absolutely. For I have seen some changes within our healthcare system, more detox programs starting, more funding available, the advance of free naloxone kits, including inhaled naloxone, saves lives. I teach many people in community to deliver naloxone. A mother was brought in as she was found unresponsive. She was resuscitated in community with naloxone. I taught her daughters how to give IM naloxone, and then I witnessed them teach their grandmother how to administer. They were taught how to give nasal naloxone. They were 9 and 11. I offer everyone who comes into my work, regardless of the reason, naloxone teaching in kits. Even if they say they or other members of the family do not use, I often say we have no idea if our neighbors may use. What if they came to you for help? What if that one time someone used and you found them unresponsive? I have had great success with this approach. You may ask, how do I cope? Some days are hard. Some years and events are harder. When I found my son in his townhouse, what I didn't tell you is that when he was loaded into the ambulance, I may have backed into it a bit. The ambulance wasn't damaged, and I did go back to work. I told my manager, I'm sorry I was late, but I had to give my son naloxone, and he's gone to the hospital. The next day she said, how do you do it? Coming to work each day? To be truthful, some days I couldn't make it to work. It's never easy when your loved ones are plastered on the front page of the daily news and you go into work and all your coworkers are looking at it. It's not easy when it's on the radio and television. It's not easier when the announcer laughs at the stupidity of what someone may have done under the influence and it's caused you so much pain. It's hard when your loved one is in jail for the special holidays and you go through some form of the motion of getting through it. It's hard when your coworker's biggest worry seems to be their daughter's prom dress, and you did not get to experience those moments in life. I've had patients yelling at me that I have the perfect life and the perfect family, and I just come to work and I don't understand how hard it is. If only they knew. I've been with family members as their loved ones have passed from overdosing. I've seen the pain. I've heard the mother's cries. And in those moments, I too have had tears run down my cheeks. And I can't ever say it will never be me. And I kneel next to them and I offer support. So we must find the laughter. I figure our family story would make a great HBO series. We've got shameless beat. Some days you just have to laugh after the pain at the situations you've never dreamt of. Have family and friends who understand the joy and pain. Some tips that are hard but must do's. Try and find some peace within yourself. Pray, meditate, seek solace in a higher power when there is no magic answers. Hibernate if you must, for advocating makes us like a bear. Walk in the sun. Eat and hydrate your physical being, even though it may be a huge undertaking. Wonder at a tree. Look at the scars and bark of it. Growing isn't always easy, and the twists and turns of the tree show a sign of struggle. Not every tree grows straight up. And remember, you aren't the only tree in the forest. My name is Tracy. I am a nurse. I love someone who uses substances and has the disorder. I am their parent. I am his mom, and I love him. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Tracy. That was a really beautiful reflection. And I have to say, we're so blessed to be able to work with amazing, strong mothers like yourself that are just so willing to share so much of themselves with us so that we can learn and be better and do better for people. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, next up we have Chantel, and I'll turn it over to her.
Good afternoon, everybody. Evening, where I come from. Thank you, Teresa, for sharing your story. It brings tears to my eyes, and I'll share a bit about my life, but I'm speaking as a lived experience voice. I am a person who suffers with substance use disorder, and I just have to put a voice to what I'm going through at this very moment before I proceed, or it will have me sidetracked. I did a presentation to correctional guards this afternoon through work, and I got very triggered. So it's hard to present to people who have once seen you or possibly seen you butt naked, searching you and searching all the crevices and holes in your body in case you have come into a correctional center with drugs on you. So I just had to give that to you guys. My name is Chantel. I'm 47 years old. I'm originally from Regina, Saskatchewan. I'm a product of rape. My mom was 14, my dad was 38, and he broke into the home and he raped her, and that's how I came to be, and I was given up for adoption. So I was adopted into, I have obviously no biological understanding of who I am as a person. I know that my children and my grandchildren are, we're all from Treaty 4 territory, Cowessess and Star Blanket First Nation. And so that unknown of who I am as a person, I figured that out at 12, that I was a product of rape. And that led to my substance use disorder. And life on the streets for me began at the age of 12 because I didn't know where I belonged. I didn't know where I fit in. And I really didn't have a sense of who I am. I've created that sense of purpose and that sense of who I am right now, but I'm on a grander journey of understanding and figuring out who I am. So obviously we all know that usage of drugs leads to jails, institutions, or death. And I was well onto my way dying. I have served numerous provincial sentences or been in provincial correctional centers. I can't count how many times, and I've served 3 federal sentences, all for drug trafficking and weapon trafficking. So I have 107 criminal code convictions for drug trafficking. Not because I wanted or chose to destroy communities. I sold drugs so I could support my habit. Before that, I'm a very educated person. I worked I worked in systems, I worked in social services, I worked for the ministry, I worked for corrections and public safety. But you can't help somebody if you don't know how to help yourself. So fast forward to my last incarceration, and I'd like to really touch on the fact that a lot of people believe that when their children are incarcerated, that that's going to save their life. They're going to get locked up and they're going to get clean in there and they're not going to use drugs in there. And I want to tell you that's an absolute blatant lie. So my drug of choice was obviously opiates. And I was too high to ever make it to my doctor's appointments for my methadone or my harm reduction. So I just bought my stuff off the street or I traded it for whatever I was trafficking in. Okay, so when you get to an institution and you're detoxing and you don't have a prescription, Willie and I am very close to people from Mom Stop the Harm. I have probably 6 moms that helped raise me at the age of 47 and guide me in a good way, and I wouldn't be here without them. But you go in there, I did a report with CBC, my last incarceration, where I was detoxing off of opiates and I was left in my bed for 11 days straight. I didn't have to stand to count. I wouldn't get medical attention. They wouldn't give me any medication. They wouldn't give me anything. And the only people that checked on me at those moments in time were the people that were incarcerated with me. So I would leave and I would keep going back and I would leave and I would keep going back. And just remember that every time you go back to a correctional center, you become a better criminal or you have more connections to the drug world. That's what happens on the inside. So all of these things are happening and I have 3 children. My daughter is 30, my son is 28, my youngest is 23, and I have 9 grandchildren, 6 of which I've reconnected with. 2 of my children both suffer with substance use disorders, and I would end up my last incarceration incarcerated with my daughter. And that was my light bulb moment. My light bulb moment was, what are you doing here? Why am I your cellmate? And am I really supposed to be incarcerated with my child? And she said, Mommy got picked up for attempted murder. And I was like, okay, I need to do something. But I knew I was on a federal transport because I still had outstanding charges in Regina. So I was still going to court for stuff while I was serving as a federal inmate. So I went back to the institution. And when I share my story, I'm a straight up speaker and I work at Straight Up. My lived experience has brought me to places and spaces never thought imaginable. But when I speak in a public setting, I speak about, I found healing in an institution. And I really want to touch on the subject that I didn't find healing in corrections by correctional officers or correctional programming or correctional guards. I found healing in the people that came in and gave of themselves and gave of their time. And I found healing in culture. And I surrounded myself with elders and I surrounded myself with ceremony, and I became to understand who I was as a woman and understand that if you grow up in a sick forest, all those trees around you will become sick. So I took all of this stuff into consideration, and that support network I had on the inside, I created for myself on the outside this time because I didn't want to go back. And I had just started using fentanyl before I got incarcerated this time. So when I came out, my friends were dying at alarming rates. My first 3 months, I had lost or known of, since my incarceration, I had lost 51 acquaintances from the streets in Regina. And I thought, what is this? Like, what is going on here? So then we fast forward. I'm living this life, this new life. Spiritual values are transformed from negative to positive. I have a job. I'm being honest with my parole officer. I'm providing urine screens. And I'm trying to role model a different way to my child. And she's so entrenched in a lifestyle, and she has a baby who's addicted to methamphetamines, who's seen more violence and been in more trap houses than probably the average adult my age, seen more gang violence. So I sent my daughter to BC and I got a phone call And I got a phone call one night, and I had to tell my daughter that her partner died of a fentanyl overdose. So nobody told me how to deal with these things or these moments and these situations while I was incarcerated and while I was reintegrating in society. And my babies lost their dad on October 23rd, 2021. I had to tell my daughter and my grandchildren that he was gone. And then I had to support them with the grief that came with it. And then I became a strong advocate. I don't call myself a professional. I'm just really loud and I'm really honest, and I speak raw truths. And some people don't like it and I offend them, but that's on them because this is my story. So then my grandchildren got apprehended and placed into my care. It will be 1 year ago. And then they were transitioned to their mom after 6 years. But I got the opportunity to grieve with them and teach them and just understand when they came to my care that they were 6 and 7 years old. And they know that their dad died of fentanyl overdose, and they know how to use nasal Narcan, and they know that their dad passed away because he had an illness and he wasn't a bad person. But nobody taught me, so I had to lean into the women that supported me, and that's how I came to find Mom Stop the Harm. I know it says that I'm here on behalf of Straight Up, but I'm not, because those are gang presentations. I just strongly off the side of my desk am an advocate for substance use disorder. I have 5 years clean. My daughter has approximately 6 weeks clean. My son has 5 months clean. I hope my children's children never pick up and have to go through the cycles or end up in prison cells together or even at all, because it's not a way to live your life. So for us right now, what we're doing is healing generations of trauma. And sorry, that's my timer. Unfortunately, it's going to take a really long time, and it's a really, really hard process. So I reach out for help all the time, and it takes courage to ask for help, right? And it takes courage to share your story. And I think the louder we are together in a positive way, we can advocate for change. But yeah, that's a little bit about who I am and where I come from. And I have a really hard time building connections through screens because they don't seem authentic to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Chantel. And I'm sorry about your negative experience today. And I very much appreciate that you put that aside and joined us, because I think we have a lot to learn from you. And you may not call yourself a professional, but I will say that you sound like a professional to me. And we're very grateful to have you on the panel tonight. And I just wanted to shout out, Chantel raised a point about the people that go in and work in correctional facilities across the prairies and across rural remote settings. And it reminds me of two very strong women, Karen Turner, who we lost a few years ago, who dedicated a lot of her time in her daily life to going to provincial corrections and meeting with people. And also Sarah Auger, who I know is teaching in the women's facility here in Edmonton. So thank you to the people that do that work. It's so critical and important. So I'm going to open it up to the Q&A now. And I'm going to start off with a question for Jenn, since I had to cut her off. And I know that Jenn has been doing some interesting work with regards to education in schools in rural communities and settings. And so I'm just going to ask Jenn if she'd be willing to share some of the work she's doing around that.
For sure. Is it okay if we bring up the slide, Holly?
Yes, I can do that.
It's so cute. They're little faces, and I'm not breaking any like privacy or confidentiality. This is a public picture, and I have permission to use it. So here I am in a school. I believe this is in Alex, which is a tiny town, maybe 300 or 3,000 people at most. And we're doing naloxone training with youth as young as grade 6 all the way up to grade 12. I can confidently say this audience is the one that terrifies me, because I find that we really have to walk such a fine line about giving kids realistic harm reduction focused education, but also not scaring them, not normalizing drug use, not upsetting the school board or parents. So I want to say, and this has really only been since 2020 around the pandemic, which is strange. We have never been invited into schools before. It's not taking a lot of outreach on our part. These are schools reaching out to us, wanting us to come in and educate their students, which is amazing. Like it's such an honor. I myself have a 14-year-old, and when I see these little faces sit down, it makes me nervous, but it's so important to give these kids, realistic education about substances and how to respond if something happens. We've had overwhelmingly positive feedback. I've gotten into 2 Catholic schools. One took a little bit of prepping, with the parent council. They were a little bit nervous about what I would say, but after meeting with me and on Zoom and having a discussion about what I would talk about, they felt like it was important and that we should continue. So thanks for bringing this up. We've probably done, I want to say 15 to 20 since the pandemic. And these are tiny towns. So what Holly was saying at the beginning about, we don't want to paint all rural communities in a not progressive and not in a good light. There is some really progressive, innovative, cool things happening. And these kids are they're on it. They want to know, they're happy and confident with themselves that they do know if something happens when they're at a party, that they know how to respond. And that it's really just such an honor to be able to talk with kids in this way. So thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate it. Look at that kid's face. Love it.
Thanks, Jen. That is a beautiful picture and amazing work that you're doing, and so happy to see you welcomed into those settings where it's so important. So our next question I'm going to direct maybe to Teresa. There's a question about the timeliness of 911 response in emergency, in emergency situations, and just wondering how rural and remote areas are coping with responding to overdoses, especially in the context of the changing drug supply, which is leading to obviously more sedation and things like that.
Well, it all depends on the community you're in and the distances that are going. Where we were living with our son, we were in a city, but cities don't always have the fastest times depending on what's going on. In the northern community that I work in, our band constables and RCMP and have been very, very timely in attending and have saved many, many lives. I can't speak on in the city I was living on the amount of time it would take. When you're in that situation, seconds seem like minutes, minutes seem like hours, hours seem like days, days go into months. And what may be 5 minutes when you are standing there trying to rouse somebody you love, it seems like an eternity. So I do know different cities, provinces do keep statistics. Our province that we're in, Manitoba, is really starting to have more extended practice, primary care paramedics being able to administer medications, and hopefully that'll get more people attending to in the front lines, the very initial steps. Having the naloxone handy to everyone now has made a huge difference in communities. And so I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Yes, that is helpful. So the next question, I'll maybe turn it over to Holly. Holly, there's a question here with regard to if you could talk a little more about the things that were on your list that didn't make your top 3 in terms of specific improvements you'd like to see with regards to improving, the situation in rural and remote settings.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such a great question. And I probably could talk for ages about it. But certainly a few things that come to mind. As I mentioned before, there is very limited service availability in rural places. And when there are available services, we might only see one, one thing available. And that's really, really challenging because if you don't mesh well with the service provider, for example, if you have a really bad experience, if that's the only place that is available or accessible to you, that's really challenging. Like that can really alter a lot of relationships and your kind of outlook on your own life and who you are as a person. And there can be a lot of like kind of self-stigma as well if you have a really negative experience. So one of the things on my list would be to have just more diversity of services. And those can look at like there's examples of many interesting ways that services are delivered. They don't always have to be brick and mortar, for example. There are things like virtual services, mobile outreach. There's some really good examples of some groups I've worked with before in Newfoundland, for example, who do really innovative work with rural outreach as well as mailing services where they might mail supplies to people in Northern Labrador, for example. So there are ways that people are being really creative about it to be able to provide more options and choices for people who use drugs. Which I think is so important because for really any other health issue that we have or concern that we have, if you're in an urban area or even smaller communities, you often at least have one or two options, and we just don't see that a lot in some of the rural communities. Other things that I think are really important, we see, for example, like Jenn has mentioned education, and I think that's really important to have peer-led or people with lived experience leading education initiatives. We know there's lots of evidence that some of our old school education methods, like the DARE program, for example, I know that was something that I had at my rural high school or rural elementary school growing up. There's lots of evidence that that sort of approach just doesn't work. It's not great for teaching people about drugs. And so I think there's a lot of different ways that we can think about education as well. But I do think that that has to be driven by community needs, but also driven with people who have that lived and living experience. Even just thinking about everything I've heard today from Tracy and Chantel, and I've talked to them before, but I've learned things from just hearing their stories. And that's so important. So those would be two additional things. And I'm sure if I sat here for longer, I could come up with much more. Those would be my top other two.
Thanks, Holly. That's very helpful. My next question actually is for Chantel. I'm very interested to hear a little more from your perspective. I think you described a lot of the problems we have in correctional facilities and institutions. Do you have some thoughts on how things could be made better for people, or like, what are the solutions? Because, in Alberta, there's a big focus on incarcerating people right now, and that will solve the problem. And so I'd like to hear kind of your perspective on that.
So I can speak more to a federal perspective. I've
Mhm.
never spent like years inside a correctional. I always chose to go federal because they offered way more than a correctional center. So for myself, what I can speak to about what I know is changing is the relationships that I've built with institutions. Primarily the one that I come from, which is Edmonton Institute for Women. Where I work at Straight Up, we do presentations and we help because we have an office in Saskpen. We do a lot of CSC training with new parole officers or new recruits or department heads to talk about the realities of addictions and the addicted gang member. So in one of those presentations, I actually presented to my deputy warden, and I thanked her because we have a history, because I was a federal inmate serving federal time, but I still had outstanding charges. I had to spend way more time on the inside, and I had to transfer to court 6 times, which it means being shackled from wrists to waist to ankles in a cubicle from Edmonton to Regina. And the last time somebody was visiting, because I did the end of my time in Pathways, a traditional healing pod. So I had relationships with the elders that came in, Bonnie Spencer, was one of them. And I did the Walls to Bridges course. That's 15 students from the inside and 15 students from the outside meet together in one room, and we learn together in a circle pedagogy when I was there anyway. But for me, the light bulb moment was I got to present to staff at CSC from inside the institution on numerous occasions, and I would always speak my truth. Oh, I'm out on my 5th transport. I don't know when I'm going to be back. I have to cancel this. I have to cancel that. So on the final time when I did that, I was going to face my abuser, and I was being sent away to testify against the man who almost killed me. And this deputy warden told me, right on, Sarah. This deputy warden told me, let me make this happen for you. And she said, nobody should have to leave and do this alone. And she got that transfer canceled, and I got to do video court from inside the institution, and I got outside supports to come in. They couldn't come in the courtroom, the video room with me, but they could wait outside. And I'll never forget that, because that was a life-changing moment for me, that somebody on the inside, a warden, deputy warden, gave a shit about me, and she brought humanness to my traumatic situation. So I thanked her that day when I presented to her at CSC. That's Merity. And I said, watch what I'm going to do. I went back to work and I said, watch. And they're like, oh, here we go again. Here's Chantel putting out these big dreams. But I do, because I put it out there, because it happens. And I emailed her. I got her email. I tracked it down. I'm really good at inserting myself in people's lives. And I said, can I come shadow you for a day? And she said, no, I think I need to shadow you more. So it's about building relationships. CSC comes to my work, the SIOs come to my work, and they want to, but change takes time. It's a process, and it might not ever happen in my lifetime, but they're looking at changing some of their processes. But I always ask them, what have any of you been in a jail cell? No. So why are you making decisions about my life without somebody like me at the table? And that is actually one of my goals, is to be like a person with lived experience working inside of CSC. I don't want to be a guard. I don't want to be a correctional officer. I don't want to be any of that, but I want to be a voice at those tables, because nobody in there has been in an iron cage. And my change with corrections federally starts with me, and it's me approaching them. And sometimes I like aggressively approach people and I don't stop emailing, but that's what I personally am seeing just for Edmonton Institute for Women. And I know other people across Canada, from Atlantic to Pacific, are talking about incorporating lived experience because of the amazing work that we're doing out of our office in Saskatchewan Penitentiary with lived experience people that actually have clearance after being released only 3 years ago from the same institution to go back in there and help others heal, help others overcome their addiction, help others come out of spaces that nobody there has been.
Thank you, Chantel. That's
Yeah.
very powerful. And congratulations on all the efforts and the big dreams. And I'm so glad that you have big dreams, because that is a huge challenge. And clearly you're having an impact already and making a difference. So I'm going to turn over to Jenn now for another question. I might ask you, Jenn, to respond to 2 questions because you've got 2 here. So the first one is just, could you elaborate on whether parents are notified before you go into schools, and just like what that process is. And then after that, there's a question about how Turning Point made a relationship with you mentioned you do some outreach on reserve, and what that process has looked like, and if there's been any resistance.
Okay, for the schools, it really depends on the school board. We have had to have permission slip type of things go home so the parents can review it ahead of time. Typically, that doesn't happen. We try to be very, sorry, I'm saying a lot, careful, I guess, when we're talking with youth. So we're not going in there and we're not, we're not showing them supplies and we're not giving them safe for using education. If youth are wanting that, they are able to reach out to us after. But while we are guests in the school, we really try to focus on talking about like what the substances do when you consume them, like the effects, I guess, and responding to a poisoning. That's really our focus, is the naloxone piece, because it's, you know, it's happening to younger and younger people and at parties, and that's the piece that we really need to focus on. We're not trying to normalize or teach kids how to use it. So the school board are usually the ones that are doing the communication with the parents. It just really depends on the school and what they think is best, and they know their kids and their parents better than we do. So yeah, it has happened before. Like I said, the Catholic school needed a little bit of reassurance, but then saw the need and approved. Yeah. And as far as on reserve, now I'm probably not the one to speak on that so much, as I tend to work east of Red Deer and my coworker is west towards Sunchild and Ochese. From what I understand, there, and this is years ago, this is probably 10 years ago, there was a bit of resistance, and harm reduction had to be set up within their health center for more of a community approach to supply distribution. And so the harm reduction worker was you know, attended feasts and attended different community events. So it wasn't like an outsider coming in and doing the work. They were very committed to building strong relationships on reserve. But that was not me, and I can't speak to much more than that. Does that help?
Definitely helps. Yes, thank you so much, Jenn. So with that, I think we're going to close the Q&A, and I know I'm going to turn it over to Holly because I don't know how we're switching into the breakout groups, but I will explain that for everyone. So we'll be moving to the second part of today's event. So we'll be moving into breakout rooms where each group will have the opportunity for further discussion. There'll be a moderator in each room, and you may have seen some of us on camera when you joined the webinar. And they will also be taking general notes from the discussion. We'll be using these notes to inform a summary report of the event, and this report will be shared with all attendees and other stakeholders. No names, communities, or other personally identifying information will be included, and we will regroup as a large group around 6 p.m., and each moderator will be asked to share 1 to 2 key points from their breakout room.